Welcome to this webinar by BA Sphere. We hope you enjoy it. Do not forget to like, subscribe and share.
Thank you everyone for joining. And as Tony mentioned, today I'm going to be talking to you about measuring adoption with data, but it is actually really something bigger than that. So it's how we as business analysts can prove whether a change we've delivered has actually landed. So not whether a tool went live, but whether behavioural change and value has followed. So brief overview. So this session is structured as a journey. So we're going to start looking at why we so often assume that adoption has happened, and then unpack what adoption really looks like. So we can then explore, what data can and can't tell us, and then we'll talk a little bit about specific roles for BAs that they play in turning those insights into impact. So, as Tony briefly mentioned, I won't go into this in a lot of detail, just a bit of context about me. So as Tony said, I've been at our firm for 19 years, which is a very long time. And I have had a numerous number of roles, which have really embedded where I am today. So it has been a lot of MI reporting, a lot of really looking at whether things have been a success, optimization of processes, and really getting under the skin of how the business works. That has led me really, really nicely into the role that I'm in now. So really grounding that sort of information of what that business need is and what makes it a success. What sits behind this session isn't theory, it's patterns that I've repeatedly seen across the different programs that I've worked in the business. So to start off, very similar to what Tony just did, so I hope you've also got your mobile phones to hand. I've just got a bit of a Slido. So it's just when you report adoption today, how do you measure that? So whether that's access and logins or active users, the activity volumes, depth of use. So if you'd all just like to scan that QR code and start popping in your responses, I'm going to put in mine as well. Bear with me a second. So this sort of thing is exactly what I see in all the different roles that I've previously experienced. So most organisations start with that access usage because that's as easy enough to count. But that's not necessarily the entire picture. So it's really, really interesting to see that obviously active users, it's an easy piece of data to be able to get hold of. So it's quite easy to be able to report on that. And so what's interesting is much harder, what you can't see on this is that adoption is where it actually lives. So it's trying to work out, what that adoption piece is most appropriate. So I want to start with a question. So how many of you have worked on a project that was delivered on time, on budget, signed off, and then you've quietly moved and disappeared? So you've moved away. So I've been there, and I know others have too, where you deliver what's been agreed as successful. The go live happens, the stakeholders are happy, and then you move on. But have you ever been back months later and looked at that data, and what does it show? Did people really adopt that change? How has that worked? Was it just logins? Have people gone back to old approaches? The tool may exist, but has that shifted behaviours or not? So that raises a bigger question for me as a BA, is if behaviour doesn't change, can we really call it a success? So that's what today's about. So how we measure adoption with data so we can prove that that change has happened. So a real life example that stuck with me that I heard from a colleague a while ago. So it's a few years ago, a colleague of ours worked at one of the largest European large energy companies, and he quickly discovered that a major change had not landed as intended. So the organisation was writing off £130 million of bad debt every year. Not good at all. So to address this, they invested in a £5 million debt management system designed to enable early customer interventions and get better data capture. So the project ran for 18 months and it cost the business £500,000. It was launched on time and on budget. It was great, they were happy, it was deemed a success. But the adoption told a different story. So from day 7, they had 50% of users accessing that system. By day 30, that had dropped down to 10% of users were using that system in 30 days. So it had just dropped. By day 90, there was 0 active users in the system. And then by day 180, the system was shut. It closed down because it wasn't being used and was redundant, and it was a massive waste of money. So the system itself, it wasn't a bad system. It was the delivery and how that was masked. The adoption was masked due to it appearing to be a success. So this sort of thing, we need to make sure we measure the right things early to make sure that it's actually landing where it needs to land. So the core problem is projects get delivered, but the value is assumed. So go live becomes that sort of finish line, and success often isn't measured at all after that. And a line I always try and come back to is, if nobody used it, nothing has changed. So you can bring in a fantastic process or a fantastic new system, but if it's not being used, you're not changing that obsolete process that was previously being used, and people will naturally revert back to what they know if they can't see that success and that benefit. So just a bit more broadly, so what actually does adoption mean? So it's not just accessing and logins. It's not that they opened it once. Adoption is more of a sustained behaviour. So that really delivers the value. Adoption's when it becomes a new way of normal, and that's the way that they work. So that new process has really, really embedded and is really showing that benefit to the users and the people who would be using the system. So the types of changes that BA work with, because obviously I understand people work in different industries, but there are various different ways that we can look at that sort of change and adoption piece. So this applies whether you're delivering a CRM, or internal tools, a process change, AI, policy or compliance change, or even data reporting improvements. Different solutions have the same sort of adoption problems, and so this is something that needs to be addressed. So how I work with this is I tend to adopt when it's adoption, an adoption framework, which is a 5-layered adoption approach. So the first is reach. So can people actually use it? Are they set up? Are they trained? Are they enabled to use this solution or this process change? Then there's usage. How often are they using it? Are they using it at all? Making sure that it's actually resonating. And that's where a lot of organisations tend to stop. So they don't look any further than that. They just look at that, are they using it and can they use it? And a lot of organisations stop at that point, whereas you really need to get into the depths of it. So the next interesting point is when you look at the depth. So how is it being used? Not just whether it was opened. Where is that benefit? What elements is being used in that solution, that software, that system? What elements are actually being used and really driving that change? Then there's the actual behavioural change. So has the old way of working actually stopped? Or are people still finding workarounds? So they've reverted back, or they're adapting processes in not an intended way. And then finally, there's the outcomes. So did it translate into time saving or better quality or improved service? How is that value actually being realised? So you have this new solution, and is it being pushed in the correct way? So just to make that a little bit more real and put it into practice, each layer tells something different. So reach, so who can use it versus who is actually using it. This tells you whether adoption is even possible. If people aren't enabled or trained or provisioned, low usage isn't an adoption issue, it's the access issue. So the typical measures for that tend to be percentage of target users enabled, percentage trained or onboarded, license or role coverage, just to make sure that you've got the correct people using the solution. Then the usage, so is it being used at all? So this is the most commonly measured layer and most overused in its own, on its own. So typical measures for that are obviously active users, whether that be daily, weekly, monthly, frequency of use, volume of activity, and it is incredibly useful, please don't get me wrong, but it's just not enough on its own. Like, it gives a story, but it doesn't paint the full story that you need. So next is the depth of usage. So how is it being used? So this moves beyond the are they in the system to are they using it properly? So the typical features of this are, feature adoption, the type of actions performed, the complexity or completeness of use, and this often reveals, partial adoptions or workarounds that people are using. So then they need to be addressed, and they can be. Next is the behavioural change. So has the old way actually stopped? Like, they are not using that old way anymore. And this is where adoption genuinely starts and where dashboards rarely go. So typical measures of that is, reduction in legacy tools or processes, shifts from old behaviours to new behaviours, drop in manual steps or spreadsheets or emails or reworks. If its behaviour hasn't changed, then adoption hasn't really happened, even if usage is high, because you may have isolated users who are using the solution, whereas it's not properly being adopted by all. And that can be gathered by whether it be surveys or feedback, items like that, more the qualitative information. And finally, the outcome. So is value being realised? So this layer is what the leadership teams tend to care most about, and it only makes sense when it's linked to the behaviour. So typically measures for this are, time saved, errors reduced, faster turnaround, cost avoidance or revenue impact, service or customer outcomes, and outcome data without behavioural context is just a correlation. So it needs that sort of backing to add to it. So adoption isn't a single metric. It's a story that's told across layers of data, and it's making sure that that story is fully portrayed as it needs to be. So just wanted to mention about choosing the right metrics. So when choosing metrics, the order matters. So you need to start with your business objective and be clear of what you're trying to achieve. Then identify the behaviour that must change, because if behaviour doesn't change, the metrics will never prove that value. That defines measurable indicators, and the right metric shows whether the new way of working is actually happening. So it's just making sure that you're driving those metrics. So adoption rarely comes from one place. So we can pull it from various analytical systems. It could be process data. As I say, there could be surveys or feedback to get that sort of qualitative information. And then there could also be observations and interviews, post rollouts. But the BA skill is, triangulation of combining weak signals into reliable and relatable stories. So making sure that you're gathering all that information from those different sources and portraying it in the right way to show that adoption is real. So next, I was just going to mention about there are a few traps that I've seen as I've worked on these sorts of things before. So measuring logins to success, as I've already mentioned, this is the most common pitfall. So treating logins or access as proof that adoption has happened. Logging in will only tell you if someone's opened a tool. It doesn't tell you whether they've worked differently, whether they're using it meaningfully, or driving any value. High login volumes sit alongside unchanged behaviour and hidden workarounds, which means adoption actually hasn't occurred. Then there's no baseline. So without a baseline, it's impossible to prove that improvement. If you only start measuring after go live success, then it becomes subjective. It feels better, or it might seem quicker, but you even need a rough baseline just to agree up front so that you've got that something concrete to compare against and turn opinions into evidence. So you can say that a certain process previously took 4 days, it's now only taking a day, and you have that comparative information. Then there's measuring too late. So when adoption measurements start after go live, it becomes very, very reactive. So early warning signs are missed, problems are harder and more expensive to fix. Designing what success looks like before rollout allows you to spot those issues early and course correct whilst change is still taking shape. And I'll go through in a moment something that we're doing at the moment, which is starting that sort of adoption interrogation early and identifying and really defining it early on. So these pitfalls don't happen because the team don't care. Like, that's not the reason. They happen because adoption isn't designed deliberately. And that's where BAs come in and really give that value. Sometimes there's too many metrics. So I used to be quite guilty of that when I was earlier in my career. Dashboard fills with dozens of metrics, which can often hide the insights rather than reveal them. So when everything is measured, nothing really then stands out, and stakeholders lose sight of what actually matters. Fewer decision-led metrics create far more clarity than comprehensive reporting that no one can act on, because you've got so many different charts on there that everybody's got to try and digest. Whereas if you can distill that down to the key metrics that they need to be seeing, then that's always going to be the best approach. Ignoring qualitative insights. Sorry. So adoption is human behaviour, but reporting often focuses on just the numbers. And quantitative information can tell you what's happening, but not why. So ignoring feedback, observations, and support insights lead to the wrong conclusions and missed opportunities to intervene effectively. So making sure that you get that qualitative feedback is very, very important. And then finally, measuring too late, sorry, my notes were the wrong way around. And so the whole measuring too late piece, so just making sure that you start that sort of process early. So I've just got another slide, as if everybody's still got their phones to hand. So I just wanted to ask, which pitfall causes the most damage to your organisation? I'm just interested to just see, if people have similar sort. I'm going to also do the same because I have an opinion of this. And as I said, none of this is mistakes made by bad teams, very normal patterns, but I am just interested to see, which one hurts where you work most. And what's reassuring here is how consistent this is. So these pitfalls aren't show up everywhere, which tells us that this isn't a design problem. It's a design problem, not a people problem. So it's actually really, really insightful that, everybody experiences these same sort of pitfalls. And the question isn't that, who's doing it wrong, it's how we design measurement in a way that avoids these traps. That's really interesting to see. And as I say, learning over the years, I've definitely been victim to the top two, most definitely. Not doing that sort of reverting back. And that is something that Tony's taught me very, very well with regards to the benefits realisation and all that sort of piece. And really, honing in that extra detail after release. That's brilliant, thank you. So, turning the data into insights. So this is where we shift from reporting to analysis. So we're not just looking at what the numbers say, but where adoption's lagging and why. Really getting under the skin of why it's not hitting the mark where we were expecting. Low usage isn't failure. It's a signal that something needs attention and that something needs to be addressed. And so I think that's where BAs really come in with especially if you've been involved in the requirements early on, or that sort of defining the actual scope, then you following through with that after the event after release and making sure that adoption's there, it really, really resonates and really helps make these things a success. So the BA's role. So this is where BAs play a critical role. So we define what success looks like, and we do that early. So we embed measurements early and make sure that we have all that fully defined. And we can turn those numbers into insights. So we can then really, really look at that data, whether that be numerical, whether that be the verbatim, we make sure that we've got that data. And we can influence what happens next. So if we don't define success, someone else will, and usually too simply. So especially when we've really, really been working under the hood of these projects, it's really, really worthwhile us helping define that success, because we know what the actual business requirement is. So I just wanted to mention just about something that I'm working on currently in the business. Obviously without the actual dashboard that I'm working on, but just to give you a bit of detail. So I wanted to share a real example of how we're approaching adoption measurement in practice. And the most important point in this is this work is happening before full rollout has begun. So we're really, really establishing this early on to make sure that we're capturing the correct information, we've got the correct people on board, we know what our expectations are once this rollout occurs. So rather than waiting until go live and asking, how do we measure the success now? We've deliberately stepped back first and designed what that success and adoption should look like up front. So before the rollout, we've agreed what behaviours we expect to change, how we'll know those changes are happening, and what signals actually indicate value rather than activity. And early on, we've defined the reach and enablement measures. So who will be trained and onboarded and at what point, how will they be supported, so that the adoption issues aren't later mislabeled as resistance or failure. We're making sure that they're fully supported, that they've got all the resources they need, they've got everything they need in order to be able to become an active adopted user. We've also agreed how usage data will be used, so we will obviously be using usage data, but only as an initial signal, not as proof of success. So it's going to be more to make sure that we're driving that adoption where needed, where there's any gaps and any what appears to be resistance, not that it necessarily is, and that'll be across our different teams or our different job roles, just to make sure that we're really highlighting where that adoption's lacking, so that we can then reinforce, what's in it for them, making sure that we've got that sort of underlying information to help us drive that rollout further. So crucially, we've defined how we'll measure behavioural change and outcome over time. Things like consistency of use, reduced in old workarounds or productivity, the quality and impact on people and the clients that we have in our business. And this reporting that we're currently building at the moment has been deliberately audience-led. So different groups will see different views dependent on what they need to be seen to help us drive that adoption. So it also helps with various decision making from different roles within the business, to rollout readiness, to adoption support for long-term value. The key differentiator here is that adoption measurement isn't just a bolt-on after delivery. It's designed in advance, so that as this rollout is going to be happening, we're seeing clearly and not scrambling for the data afterwards and trying to intercept what it was after the fact. It's making sure that we're establishing that early on and really pushing that forward. So this example of what we mean by adoption-led reporting, at the top layers on the chart, we're going to be showing the adoption levels, so the reach, the usage, the depth, the behaviour and the outcomes. So we don't stop at activity alone. Oh, sorry, that's too far. In the middle, we segmented adoption by the practice, by the role, by the office. So we can really support and look at the patterns, seeing if there's any patterns with regards to how people are adopting or not adopting, and help us push that, make that adoption strong and support where it's needed. And then on the right hand side, we're going to surface insights and actions, because reporting only matters if it leads to decisions. And then at the bottom, we connect the adoption to outcome, productivity gains, client impact, well-being, which is going to be done via surveys, and financial signals. This is all going to be phased over time, and it'll be triangulated with other data. But the point to prove is it's not going to be success on day one, but we're getting the good foundations in there at the moment, so we can make sure that what we are delivering is going to have a success when it comes to adoption. So I want to finish by drawing together the key things that I'd like you to take away from today. So first, adoption is a behavioural change, not access, not logins, not activity. If people haven't changed how they actually work, then and what they do day to day, then adoption hasn't happened, regardless of how good the delivery looked. The second takeaway is that data only matters when it links to an outcome. So usage data on its own is interesting, but it doesn't give all the value it needs. It only becomes really meaningful when you can connect that to behavioural change and then to something that the business actually cares about, and whether that be time savings, quality, client experience, impact for the users, really making sure that that is being driven. Third is the numbers, never the full story, as I've said multiple times. So the quantitative data tells you what's happening, but it rarely tells you why. So that's why adoption measurements has to combine numbers with that qualitative insight. So the feedback, observations, support data, conversations, that's how we avoid drawing the wrong conclusion and having a similar situation to what my colleague had. Another really important point is timing. So adoption should be measured early, ideally designed before the rollout begins. If we wait until after go live to think about success, we're really reacting rather than steering. Early measurement gives us signals, not verdicts, and it's a much healthier place to be in. And then finally, and this is where the BAs really add value, is BAs are uniquely positioned to define that success and prove whether change has actually worked. We sit between the business goals, the data, and the people who are actually doing the work. So if we don't define how adoption and success will be measured, as I say, someone else will, and it could be too simplistic, and so we need to make sure that that's correctly defined. So adoption measurement isn't just reporting, it's part of a solution design, it's part of change, and it's a way for BAs to move from delivery to proving value. Final note, just if we don't measure adoption, we're not measuring success, we're just measuring delivery, and it's making sure that we're measuring that success piece. So I want to thank you all for your time. I'm very sorry if I spoke too quick, because I do that quite often, but I'm happy to take any questions or reflections if anybody has anything to add.
Thank you for watching this video. Please remember to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for upcoming webinars.